Well, good afternoon, Camp Mac friends, and we're so excited to welcome Mike Hoffman here today. Longtime WNDU weatherman, severe weather guru in the area, I'd say.
Right.
And a Camp Mac alumni.
Absolutely.
You want to just give a real brief kind of your Camp Mac experience?
Well, I have great memories of Camp Mac. When I was in high school, I came here as a camper, and then when I was at Purdue one year, I came back and was a counselor for 1 year as well.
Cool.
So yeah, this brings back a lot of memories. I love the fact that it's kind of stayed intimate. Mm-hmm. You showed me around, and it looks awesome.
Did a bit of shopping. And,
right, I bought some T-shirts.
Yeah, a lot of memories. So our theme for Giving Day this year being power and electricity, because we've had a lot of storms over the past year. And so we're so thankful for someone like you to come through and explain all these terms and things we hear. So let's start off, I guess, with the most basic of what's the difference between a thunderstorm and a severe thunderstorm?
So a thunderstorm, basically, you're going to hear the light. You're going to hear the thunder. It's the lightning, and you can count 5 seconds to know how far away it is. Every 5 seconds is 1 mile. So you're not really going to hear thunder from 20 miles away, but once a thunderstorm gets kind of close, you do. So basically, it's one that doesn't cause any damage. It can still get windy. It can still have 30, 40, 45 mile per hour winds in it, and a quick little burst come through. But basically, a non-severe thunderstorm is one that does not create damage. It's kind of the easiest way to explain that. And we get those all the time here. They can knock out power with one bolt of lightning. It can be the only bolt the whole storm ever has. And it could do damage to the lightning, or to the electricity supply anyway.
So, bit of a peek. We're recording this on March 31st. There's a chance of severe weather tonight. We'll see what happens.
No, the highest risk we've had in a while.
So, last year here at Camp Mac, we had 8 long power outages. And the first one of those was caused by a derecho. Tell me a little bit about what derecho sounds so like intimidating and like mysterious. What makes a derecho a derecho?
Well, there are certain rules for it, which I would have to look up to actually come up with. But they're basically long-lasting severe thunderstorms with a lot of wind. And so when you get a normal thunderstorm that starts to become heavier, the burst of wind that you have is basically air from the upper part of the thunderstorm coming down. And so you have all this warm air going up. The colder air starts coming down from above, so that cooling breeze in a normal thunderstorm, that's where it's coming from, is up above. When that becomes a little stronger, that slams into the ground and starts pushing outward. And so damage from derecho is like that. Whereas tornado damage typically is being sucked into the middle. This is the opposite of that. And a derecho can sometimes be a couple counties wide, which is massive. And they can go across several states, lasting for hours, sometimes 14, 15 hours.
I know Iowa had a bad one a few years ago. It flattened all the corn, and so...
it just comes through. And so... this derecho that hit here was just beginning at that time. So we would not have called it a derecho at that point. But once it went across Ohio and Virginia, and then it actually curved
when you see that curve, that's really when you know, like this is bad.
It ended up dying in the southeast. I mean, the remnants of it went into the Gulf of Mexico, which was crazy.
So what's it called? Because I know a big sign of the derecho is when that storm really has that curve to it. But you see that in smaller storms as well. Is there a technical term for that?
Well, that's that push of air going out. And so the strongest winds are going to be where that's pushing out farther and faster. So it kind of makes sense when you think about it. When you get that downburst, the middle of it is pushing faster. That's where the strongest winds are going to be. Now, you can get little tornadoes on the edges, sort of like when you, out here on Lake Waubee, you push a paddle, you get the 2 little eddies.
So
once in a while that can cause a minor tornado, but when all this damage is already going on, they sometimes get missed. They're just part of this main downburst then.
Well, and I think so many of us are so familiar with tornadoes here because there's been a lot in the news recently, whether in Mississippi or Mayfield, Kentucky, but also locally, the Napanee tornado and even some farther back memories towards the Monticello tornado and the tri-state.
Which I was about 15 miles away from the Monticello tornado. I was a freshman in high school. We had just gotten done with baseball practice, and in Delphi, the sky had turned really green, which I figured out later meant hail. And then we find out later the big tornado hit. Luckily, after school was out.
Oh, goodness.
Because it destroyed the high school there in Monticello, Twin Lakes.
I knew it took out the courthouse, but...
Yes, it did that too.
Nasty storms.
Right.
So we have been lucky not to have a tornado here at camp. Cross our fingers.
Right.
Keep it that way.
Right.
But back in the early 2000s, we did have a microburst, and I showed you some pictures. We'll have some pictures on the video now of some of the damage that did. It took down about 70 trees. So what's kind of the difference? What makes a microburst so potent?
I would say you could compare the microburst to the derecho, but micro meaning smaller and shorter, whereas the derecho is a macro burst, you could almost call it, because it's going on for a long period of time. Microburst is where the thunderstorm, that wind slams into the ground and then pushes out, but it doesn't have that warm air being sucked in from the side to keep it going. And so you can look at a thunderstorm like an engine. If it doesn't have that fuel continually coming into it, then it is going to die. And because it kills itself, because the fuel is the warm, humid air, and when it has this cold air coming down, you kind of just kill itself. So that's why microbursts typically don't last that long. In other words, it's not going to go from Warsaw to Angola or anything. It's going to go across half of Kosciuszko County. And so...
and is that the same reason then that so many tornadoes are like EF0, EF1? Because they just run out of gas, essentially?
Yes.
Okay.
Or they don't quite have the energy there to begin with. The tornado, however, there are small tornadoes that don't form in this way, but the bigger tornadoes, potentially bigger tornadoes, actually have a big rotating thunderstorm.
Okay.
And in some cases, you can actually see the hook on the southwest corner of it. So in those thunderstorms, there is a path for that warm air to keep coming into it from the south. Because the tornado's here. The colder part of the thunderstorm is up here with the rain. And so tornadoes can sometimes keep going with that rotating thunderstorm because it has that path for the warm air to come in, and so it's not killing itself necessarily. So the thing is, it's hard to make a big tornado. You need a lot of power, a lot of big rotation in the thunderstorm. It's sort of like a bathtub drain. Where the water goes real slow out here and then right down the middle. So you flip that over. And so the big rotation is here, and it's hard to get a strong rotation at the ground in that place. And so a lot of tornadoes are just like trying to get going. They do a little, they knock a few trees over here, they take a roof off, and then they kind of go back up, then they come back down again. But it's those big ones that you really have to be concerned about. Now, obviously, you don't want a small one here either. But most people that are inside would survive that. A big one, you're in trouble if you're above ground for an EF4 or 5 tornado. And that's about the only way you can say it. My wife and I built a house in West Lafayette for our retirement home. And they didn't allow basements. That really bothered me. In this, because the houses are close together. It's a city home. And so they didn't have basements. So I actually had them shore up the pantry in the middle of the house. Now, an EF4 or 5, I'm leaving. My wife and I are leaving.
Yeah.
because we don't have a place underground. But a smaller one, we're probably surviving in that little enforced room. But, you know, you take your chances around this area with severe weather, like people in California take their chances with an earthquake.
Yeah.
I personally would rather have a risk of tornadoes than earthquakes, because when the ground starts moving under you, that's a scary thing.
Usually we can see a tornado coming or the chance of a tornado a few days out.
Yes.
Earthquakes are just like, there's an earthquake.
We have no clue they're coming.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, and so most, you know, the small tornadoes don't always get a warning. They happen fast, they're done. The big tornadoes, most people are going to have 10, 15, 20-minute warnings.
Yeah.
You got to watch the counties to the west of you sometime and see if there's a big one out there.
Yeah.
The Weather Service has gotten better. If you actually have access to their full warning, they will tell you in there, this is a particularly dangerous situation. Okay, if they don't say that, then we're not talking an EF4 or 5 at that point. Now, the Napanee tornado was an EF3.
Yeah.
So they can still do a lot of damage, but the 4s and 5s just do so much more.
Yeah, that's what we've seen in Mayfield and Roaring Fork, I believe it was, in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So with tornadoes, well, I want to talk on warnings. I remember it used to be that warnings were like county-wide things, and now they're much more detailed, and that just is very reassuring, I guess, of just like, oh, okay, so it's not going to hit this part. And
right, it is, the sirens are still countywide.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that they get to the technology at some point where they only set off the sirens that are in that little pie-shaped area. Because you're right, we don't need to warn everybody and scare everybody.
Yeah.
Last year, we live on the southwest edge of the Purdue campus, and tornado warnings were issued. And of course, I'm thinking 48,000 students are now trying to find places, hopefully, where they're going to be safe.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the tornado, and it's like, yeah, that's not going to come this way.
No.
and we weren't in the official warning area, but the sirens went off countywide.
Yeah.
And so everybody...
And that's why we here at Camp Mac, a bit of behind the scenes for people watching, we have a triangle, or really a diamond, that we watch in terms of severe weather. So we're not like, well, Milford's under a warning now. It's Bremen to Goshen to Warsaw. So that we're watching a little farther out. And even myself personally, I'm watching South Bend, Elkhart, Bremen, Plymouth, because I want to know well in advance.
Right.
So going back on tornadoes a little bit, I'm not sure when it was, but it used to be like an F4, and now it's an EF4. What's the E stand for, and why is it important?
So let me go back to the Fs.
Yeah.
It was Dr. Fujita from the University of Chicago that came up with this level 0 to 5 on tornadoes, and he put numbers for wind speed, estimated wind speeds, and damage for each of those different numbers.
Yeah.
Using Doppler radar and doing research on it, they found out that the wind speeds were slightly different than Dr. Fujita had estimated. They were a little higher than what he had estimated.
Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, you know, why change it? So it's enhanced Fujita scale. That's all it is. All they did was change the wind speed numbers, not the damage. So I think they should have just left it, but that's just me.
And at those wind speeds, it's bad anyways. So
yeah, 200 miles per hour, 180. Does it matter?
It's bad.
Yes.
So one thing, living in northern Indiana, people always hear about lake effect snow. But here we're on Waubee Lake, obviously nowhere near the size of Lake Michigan. How does a small lake like Waubee, does that help us in severe weather, or does that make it worse?
It depends on which way you are from the lake. For the most part, this lake doesn't have much of a microclimate. Obviously, you're out on the water, you might be 3 or 4 degrees cooler during the
Yeah.
summer just because of that. But as far as storms go, it's not really going to make a difference except for this fact. There's nothing to slow the wind down coming across the water.
Okay.
And you wouldn't think that makes a difference, but it does. If a storm is barely severe, or if a tornado is an EF0 and it's coming across through wooded areas like a lot of this area is, those trees are messing with the rotation and the downburst part and slowing the winds down a little bit. And so if a storm is coming across a small lake like this, you'll many times see a little bit more damage on the trees on the side of the lake where it hits.
Okay.
Because the winds weren't being slowed down at all across the lake. So it is a minor effect. It's not a major effect.
We're
in
not
that
going to
way.
get lake effect snow.
No.
It's not going to
Right.
increase things.
Right.
Interesting. Cool. Well, thanks so much for covering that. Obviously, with severe weather, one of the big concerns is safety.
Right.
And so, kind of the last question I have is, what's one of the biggest severe weather myths that you wish people would stop believing or stop thinking?
Oh, I feel like over the years of talking to people, a lot of times they think, well, I'm protected in this area because I'm in a valley, or I'm protected because storms seem to split as they come our way. Yeah, don't believe that. We don't have, if you live out in Colorado, that can be a difference.
Yes.
We don't have those big mountains, and so you're not talking major differences from one part of a county to another. Yeah, randomly, and maybe they've been hitting more in one part of your county than others, but that doesn't mean they're always going to do that, and it may even out someday. So,
Interesting.
yeah, I think sometimes people just think that they're somehow protected in their area a little bit more, and they may not be.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just about Camp Mac.
Yeah.
I think I wish all kids. I just saw a study on how, when they did a survey of people in this country, the number of people who are religious, the number of people who are patriotic, everything is going down. People are doing less and less of that. I wish all kids would have a chance to have an experience like Camp Mac or another Christian camp, where they learn something about a higher power and learn something about it's more than just me, it's more than just my social media, my Facebook page or Instagram in the kids' cases now, because I think I have little memories of Camp Mac, but I think the biggest memory I have is coming home and missing the place, and you're on a high at that point. You come home with a high because you had so much fun, you learned about God, you learned about Jesus, and you come home with this high, and then you go back to school and you lose that high over the next few weeks,
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody has that experience. And a place like Camp Mac, to me, is so important for these kids who don't have that.
Yeah.
They aren't attending a church, and there's something missing in their life.
Yeah.
And so I think a place like Camp Mac or other Christian camps are just awesome.
Well, thank you so much for that and for sharing today and making the trip up here. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.